Thank you, Taylor. Welcome everybody to Sloat Studios here in Mill Valley, California. The sun is out, beautiful day, and we're going to talk about organic gardening, a tiny little topic that won't take more than about 12 hours or so to cover. So we're going to talk about the basics of organic gardening. Not all the nuances, and if you go to your public library, you will find an entire shelf of books, huge, small, specialized, general, about organic gardening. And there are lots of different approaches, lots of different opinions about it. Some of them border on the religious, some of them are more scientific. My approach is fairly flexible, as it is in most things in life, and I will tell you how I go about it and how some other people go about it, and hopefully you will be armed to do your garden at home in at least a partially organic manner, and we'll give you some ideas for how to do that. Organic gardening is nothing more or less than maybe gardening before the revolution, the agricultural revolution that brought in chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides and herbicides. People didn't have to spawn the term organic gardening back in the 1800s because that was the only way there was to garden or to farm, for that matter. And although they could bring in fertilizers in the form of animal manures and compost, they didn't have concentrated nitrogens the way we do now in chemical form that can be applied by tractor or applied by even by aircraft. So we're in a sense going back in time and saying, how do we grow food or other plants the way nature intended with a little bit of help from us. So that means basically we stay away from fertilizers that have been chemically created. We stay away from pesticides that are not derived from natural products like oils or soaps, and herbicides that are other than things like vinegars, oils, again, naturally derived products. And why do we do this? Well, I think Rachel Carson woke us up back in the 60s that a lot of the things that had made it possible to grow more and more food for the world were staying around in the ecosystem and doing a lot of damage to it. Things that were long-lived, that killed off all kinds of insects, which then affected birds, it affected bird eggs, et cetera, and it washed into our streams and into our lakes and into the ocean. There was a backlash, if you will, to that, and J.I. Rodale was one of the first in the 40s to start writing about a different, maybe old-fashioned way of gardening that was more ecologically friendly, and he believed, and I agree, healthier for all of us in terms of the food that we eat. He's long gone, but his descendants are still writing books about organic gardening, and on the outline that's on our webpage, there's a reference to one of them. I suspect that's a granddaughter that wrote that one. There are lots of other good references for you, including some on the Sloat webpage. I'm happy to be able to show you the latest edition of Golden Gate Gardening.
Oh, I didn't know.
The 30th anniversary edition, which just came out in August. This is the Bible, if you will, for growing vegetables in the Bay Area. And I'm happy to report that it has an extended section on Contra Costa County gardening, so a little warmer climate than a lot of the original writing addressed in this book. Pam Pierce is the author, and she's also been a webinar spokesperson with us. And I highly recommend any of the editions of Golden Gate Gardening, but this is the latest and greatest. I also highly recommend two other resources for your general gardening pleasure. Basically, any edition of the Sunset Western Garden Book, which is now long out of print, but there are lots of versions available at used bookstores, at websites, on eBay, wherever you might shop. And it doesn't really matter which edition you get, they're all great. Not so much focused on vegetables, but general landscape planting, and a wonderful resource. And I've also mentioned in the outline a book that I really enjoy, which is called All New Square Foot Gardening, Mel Bartholomew. And this is a great resource for helping you visualize how to space your plantings, how to get the most out of your square footage. It tells you how big plants get, how close you can plant them together, and helped me a lot in being able to use my space more efficiently, because we all generally have limited space to garden in. So those three are wonderful resources. Organic gardening for people who sell to the public, like the farmers who sell at the farmers markets, or people who package up products and sell them at Whole Foods or the Good Earth here in Marin, or any market that has goods that are marked organic, have to comply with the organic law. There's a federal law, and there's a California law, and many other states have laws as well that define what can go into products that are labeled organic. And there are both governmental and private organizations that look at the inputs that a farmer is using for their farming methods and certify that they are within the bounds of the law, which we hope it then excludes contaminants and things that we don't want to have in our food. Those certification marks, we have this little poster, I grabbed it out of our veggie section, but these are some of the marks that are on products that are sold for inclusion in organic gardening. This is the federal one, U.S. Department of Agriculture, organic. You'll see that on lots of things. This is the California equivalent. That is, we'll only see on products in California, I believe. OMRI is a private organization that certifies organic farms inputs. Sloped Organics is a label that we put on some of our products that are certified organic. And in general, if you're going to garden organically and you want to add material to your garden, you'll be looking for this kind of mark on the product. So that could be compost, it could be manures, could be more bark oriented or peat moss oriented kinds of products, or fertilizers, and even pesticides that are marked for organic gardening. And we have some examples right here. E.B. Stone has a tremendously long list of certified organic inputs. This is their tomato vegetable food, and you can see down here in the corner is the little California certification mark, and they'll have that on any of their products that are organically certified, and they generally use this term in the name Stone Organics, as opposed to a different line which is called Stone Naturals. There is no legal meaning for natural, so anybody can use that on anything. So for instance, the Stone chicken manure is labeled organic, but the Stone steer manure is not. And that's maybe because they can't find steer manure that will pass the test, or maybe it's too expensive to find it, and they've just decided not to do that. Many of the farmers, by the way, at the farmers market will not be certified organic. And I don't know if you still see it around, but some farmers would have a sign that says no spray. That was a way of trying to get around the organic certification, I think, and to tell you, well, we're not certified organic, but we don't spray with bad things, which is fine. But it means that no third party has been looking at the entire system of inputs and telling you, yeah, we think they're doing it right. I was surprised to notice that even things like orchid bark are now labeled organic. And I don't know why I should be surprised at that. But I've never really focused on organic gardening with orchids. And so it just, it hit me. And I also was struck by the fact that perlite, which some of us dislike from an aesthetic point of view because it's white and it floats on top of the water. But it's also organically derived. I mean, it's not an organic chemical. It's a rock that is heated up and kind of puffs up like popcorn, and that's why it's light, and it is good for aeration in soils. Mostly it's used in seed starting and starting cuttings so that there's plenty of air along with the moisture. But it just goes to show you that there's a vast array now of products that are being certified, and this is a great advantage over, you know, back in the 60s when I really started gardening. There was none of this, and you got something in a bag from wherever you could get it, or you scooped up some horse poop from somebody or whatever, and really without having any idea what was in it. And now there's lots of testing and looking at the sources of where things are coming from, and I think that's probably a good thing. What you're really doing in organic gardening is building soil, and I suppose I could say that's true for any kind of gardening. What you're really doing is building soil. Good soil results in good plant growth. And good soil means soil with the right proportions of particle sizes in it. It's kind of funny to think of it that way, but a clay soil has real tiny particles that stick together really closely, and they hold a lot of water and they exclude air. And although plants breathe in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen during the day when they're photosynthesizing, at night they do the opposite, and their roots always need oxygen to breathe. They don't breathe in carbon dioxide through the roots. So a soil that has too much moisture and not enough air is bad for the roots, and the plant's not going to thrive. The opposite of that is a real sandy soil where the particles are big. It's not that big, but they're like little pieces of gravel, and the water runs right through. It's not retained. And there's not a lot of surface area for the nutritional elements of soil to stick to so that they can feed the plants over time. The perfect soil is what we call a loam or sandy loam. Usually that's like in the Central Valley of California, where there are rivers running, or the Nile would be a good example. The river overflows, it brings the sediments, and you end up with a mixture of medium, small, and big particle sizes and a very fertile soil. Fortunately, we can amend even the clayest or sandiest of soils to make them better. And we do that by adding organic matter to them. And they tend to break up the clay, and they tend to bind together the sand, and both of them are made better for plant growth. And we use compost, which is nothing more than decomposed plant matter, or partially decomposed plant matter. Manures, animal manures, are a historic source of concentrated nutrition for plants, mostly nitrogen, but some phosphorus and potash, which are the other two macronutrients. But today, interestingly enough, we can even do it without animal manures at all. If you are a vegan farmer, and I don't know how many in the world there are, but vegan farmers now have a source of vegan fertilizer from this company, Down to Earth, which I think the nitrogen is derived from soybean meal. So you can take vegetable inputs, concentrate them essentially, and then add them to other plants to fertilize. So there are lots of ways to get the nutrition into the soil, but the very best way is with lots of compost and a modicum of manure. Chicken manure and steer manure are the most available. Sometimes there's dairy manure available. The Point Reyes Compost Company has a combination of horse and dairy manure that's very nice, called double duty, but it's expensive. Probably the easiest way is with compost and a little bit of manure. I like a combination of about 3 to 4 parts compost and 1 part manure, and dig it in well the first time into the soil, and that gets the organic matter down in the soil. And then in subsequent plantings, you can top dress, and you don't have to do the digging. And as you get a good biological culture in your soil, which means lots of little insects and other arthropods and earthworms, they will stir the soil for you. And so the backbreaking labor really only has to be done once. When you get right down to it, you turn in the organic matter the first time, and then you let the insect life in the soil do the work after that, and just mulch on top and top dress with compost, and you will end up with a wonderful soil. And you'll have better soil texture than if you're digging all the time. Digging and walking on the soil are the worst things for the structure of the soil that you can do. And to the extent that you can have garden beds that have little walkways between them so that you can reach in to the center of the garden without having to walk on it, that's better for the garden. And you may have heard of French intensive gardening, which Alan Chadwick really brought over here to UC Santa Cruz in the 60s. That involves what we call double digging. which means you dig out a shovelful of soil, basically in a trench. You modify the soil at the bottom of the trench with compost and manure, and then you return the dugout soil from the next trench into that trench. So you really dug down 2 spadefuls instead of just 1, which we would generally do. French intensive garden also developed, I mean, it's a real system that was described in the 1800s that was used by small gardeners, small farmers in France, and had to do with building raised beds, usually using rock as the support structure. And the height of the bed had to do with how much you needed basically to elevate the temperature, depending on how cold it was where you were. So the higher the bed, the sooner it would warm up in the spring. And more rock meant that it would absorb more heat during the day and radiate it into the soil during the night. And so if you were in a relatively benign place, you only needed a small wall. If you were in a colder climate, you built a bigger wall and a deeper raised bed, and then lots of organic matter, and take the manure from your cow or from your horse or whatever you had, and add it to your garden. And it was called French intensive because you could, by building up the soil that way and controlling the temperature, plant more intensely and get a bigger crop out of a given square footage of area. And you can do the same thing at home with a slightly raised bed. Doesn't have to be very tall, because we've got a very mild climate in the entire Bay Area. But if you can give 4 or 5 inches of height, that'll help the soil to warm up in the spring. And it'll make it easier for you to loosen things up and add more compost to the bed. But it'll also connect with the soil below, so the plant roots, as they go down, will get into the real soil below the bed. And you can plant them very intensely, so that your plants, your garden bed should look like it's entirely plants when they have started to grow up. They'll start out with some spaces between them. But you want them to fill in the entire area and take advantage of it. You don't want them so close that they're shading each other out, but you want them close, and you want them growing rapidly and intensely. Now it's fall now, or almost fall now, end of summer, and this is a changeover period. So things like green beans, this is an unsold pack, 6-pack of green beans, and they're trying mightily to do their job. It's too bad nobody bought them and put them in the ground. But they're at the end. We're not bringing green beans anymore to sell because their season is getting to the end. Similarly, tomatoes and peppers and squash and watermelons and melons, they're finished as far as our bringing them in. They're still probably maturing in your gardens, hopefully, but it's not time to plant more. What it is time to plant are the cruciferous vegetables. That's the whole cabbage clan. This is a cauliflower. Which one? This is snowball, which is a white cauliflower. So things like cauliflower and broccoli, and you still have time for Brussels sprouts if you want to grow those, cabbages, and then all the kales and chards and beets and lettuces, leafy greens, scallions. It's time to get those going. And some bigger things, if you want to get them in now, it's a good time. You'll be ready to harvest next year, but that would be things like artichokes. Artichokes are nothing more than a gigantic thistle plant. And the artichoke that you eat is the flower bud of the thistle. If you don't pick the artichoke, it'll turn into a big purple thistle flower. But they're good to get in this time of year so that you'll have artichokes next summer. Things like berries. This is a very pretty blueberry bush. Has a couple of blueberries still on it. That one's edible. Yeah, very good. It's a good time to plant blueberries. And other types of berries will be coming in after they go dormant, usually. Blueberries are evergreen, but things like raspberries, blackberries, boysenberries, they usually are available to you after they've gone dormant for the winter. So you're buying a kind of a stick with some roots on it. But that's a good thing to do during the winter. Strawberries should be planted in the fall so that they're well rooted and ready to go in the spring, because they've got to bloom and then make fruit. The biggest crop of strawberries usually is in June. And if you don't get around to planting them till May, you're not going to get much of a crop that year. You'll get it the next year. But if you get them in the fall now, they'll be ready for you at strawberry time next year. Now, strawberries are one of the vegetables that's usually hard to find as an organic start, like organically grown start. The labels in the little plants will also have, this one has the USDA organic marker on it, and this is from Sweetwater, and this one has the, just says organic, but doesn't have the mark on it. But this is from a farm called HP Green Vivarium. I'm sorry to report that Upstarts, Sarah and Basil Machado have retired. And so Upstarts, which was one of our favorite organic sources for vegetable and herb starts, is no longer with us. But we'll keep focusing on bringing in organic starts for as many plants as are feasible. And getting bigger plants in an organic fashion is also very difficult. This is lemon verbena, for instance, but this is grown not by the herb growers, but by a general nursery grower. Smells just as good as any other lemon verbena. It's not organically grown. Although very small ones are usually available as organic starts, larger ones generally are not. My own feeling about it is that since I garden organically at home, if I buy something that wasn't organically grown originally, it will be in time. And maybe I will even avoid using it as a food crop for a period of time. But in the end, whatever was on it is going to go away. And I will take care of it in a good way so that I'll be able to eat it later on. Seeds also come organic and non-organic. Even the same packager of seeds will have, this is botanical interest. These are peas, snap peas, and this is their organic line, which has the green stripe on top and the USDA organic. This is their non-organic line, which doesn't have either of those. Now, they do, on both of them, mark them that they're non-GMO. And that's becoming more important with seeds as time goes on. Although for home gardeners, GMO seeds have not been so far an issue. They've not been sold to us. And usually the problem with GMO seeds is that they're designed to be able to withstand certain herbicides. So they're sold to the farmers so that they can plant their crop of soybeans, whatever, and then spray weed killer all over it and won't kill those particular soybeans that have been genetically modified to withstand that. We just got the notice from Marin County here that GMO nursery products are outlawed in Marin County. We cannot sell them. I don't know that there have been any available to us to sell, but it did list some of the, I guess, newer colors of petunias and various things that have been genetically modified. You can trust that we will not have them in Marin County, and I believe Sonoma County also has outlawed them. I'm not sure about the other neighboring counties. GMO is not an issue with anything that's labeled organic. Those two are mutually exclusive. You cannot have an organic, genetically modified product and call it organic. So rest assured with that. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit because the obvious question, the soil building part all makes sense, I think, to most people. What doesn't make sense for some people is, okay, I'm gardening organically, I've got great soil, my plants are growing like crazy, and something's eating the heck out of them. What do I do? I want to kill the bugger, and what do I spray it with? And of course the answer is, well, it's not that simple. And it requires us all to take a step back and say to ourselves, okay, number one, I don't mind sharing a little bit of my produce with the insect world. Why is that? Why have I come to this relaxed position that says, if I see something biting my plant, instead of recoiling in horror, I now go, oh, finally, you've come to the banquet, and you know there's something to eat here. And the reason I've come to that attitude is that I now understand how important the insects are to the food chain. That plants are the bottom of the food chain. They take the energy from the sun and turn it into leaves. All other life has to eat plants at some level and then be eaten by something else up the food chain. Insects are the main form of life that turns leaves into something more concentrated nutritionally. And insects are what primarily feed baby birds. And without insects, baby birds would starve and there would be many fewer birds in the world. So I want to do my share and feed some insects that can then feed birds who can feed somebody else, and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean I want to lose an entire crop to a plague of locusts. But fortunately, that generally doesn't happen. What happens is that a bite gets taken here and a bite gets taken there. And I get many people coming into the nursery with a baggie full of leaves going, you know, look at this, look at this, look at this. And what they are is little tiny pieces of a leaf taken off, and then another tiny piece over here. And I try to waft out the attitude that says, this is a good thing, you're okay. They're not eating very much, it's not hurting the plant. and we can tolerate this. But there are times when they get out of control, and so we have to know how to keep a balance in the garden so that the insects that we find a nuisance, and I will not, except to say it this once, I'm not using the term good and bad insects. I'm looking for a balance of insects that eat plants and insects that eat other insects, one way or another. And if I have that balance in my garden, then there aren't going to be very many insects that are eating the plants. They'll be seasonal, they'll come and go, they'll pass through, but they won't do a tremendous amount of damage. And my aesthetic changes enough so that if I'm going to pick a leaf of kale to eat, and it happens to have a little hole in it the way that one does, I don't know how well you can see that, but there's a hole in the leaf, and that was probably made by a little chewing insect. But that's not going to bother me, and I would hope that most of us can get to the point where that's not an issue where we feel we have to kill every bug in sight in order to minimize this little hole. One of the ways that you get this good balanced insect population is to plant many different kinds of crops and to intermingle flowers with them. This attracts insects that pollinate the flowers, and having many different plants confuses insects which tend to be monocrop interested. They're only interested in eating one thing today. And if we have a huge garden of that one thing, then they go, wow, I died and gone to heaven. But if it's kale they're looking for, and I've got kale and I've got lettuce and I've got some cilantro mixed in with it, and I've got a sage plant over here giving off strange sagey smells, the insects kind of going, well, I think I'll look for greener pastures over here. And it really works. There's quite a bit of scientific work done on that, because organic farmers in particular need to protect large areas of farmland from destructive pests. And one of the flowers that's the most useful for helping to get a good balance is simple old alyssum. Little white flowers. They're actually a brassica, a cabbage or broccoli relative, and they attract lots of good pollinating insects. They attract insects that parasitize some of the insects that we like the least, like aphids. Little parasitic wasps lay eggs inside the aphid, and the larva kills it from the inside, like a bad sci-fi movie. But alyssum is wonderful. Marigolds do a nice job of mainly giving off a strong scent. Their roots also are helpful for certain types of nematodes, but we don't have much of those as a problem around here. But they do give off good odors that are confusing to the insects. And cosmos is a wonderful plant for attracting pollinating insects. If you look closely at flowers that insects are visiting, you'll see honeybees, of course, and you may see some little native bees, but you'll also see some things that look like bees that are really flies. They're called syrphid flies, and they just eat nectar and pollen, but their larvae eat aphids like crazy. And so lots of the insects that visit the flowers don't directly deal with the pest insects, but their larvae do. So ladybugs are an obvious one where the ladybugs don't live on the nectar or pollen of flowers, but they directly eat some of the aphids, but their larvae eat many more aphids than the ladybugs themselves. So if you can get the ladybugs early in the season, as soon as you see the aphids on your plants, they'll stay for a couple of generations and make baby ladybugs, and eventually in the fall they'll fly away. But as long as you've got food for them, they'll stick around. There are insecticides that are listed for organic gardening. This is insecticidal soap. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's the official name is potassium salts of fatty acids. And they're listed for organic gardening, and they do their job by simply smothering soft-bodied insects. So if you have white flies, aphids, spider mites, thrip, something as mild as a soap will kill them because it coats them and they can't breathe. It has no residual effect at all. So if it dries and the insect walks on it, it'll have no effect on the insect. It has to be made, you have to make contact with whatever insect it is that you're trying to kill. And similarly, oils, let's see what we have here. Oh. I didn't bring a bottle of oil, but neem oil is sold. Things that are called horticultural oils are sold. They're very light, either vegetable or mineral oils that again kill insects by contact, by smothering them, have no residual effect. Oils, unlike soaps, have a little bit of antifungal property, and so they can do a little bit of preventive work against funguses like powdery mildew. So they're often used. Neem oil is packaged, for instance, as Rose RX. It'll say Rose 3-in-1 or something like that. And the idea there is that it prevents funguses, kills funguses, and kills insects. But again, we want to use this as a last resort, basically. If I have a plant and it's just 1 or 2 or 3 plants that have a lot of aphids on them, my first approach is to use a hard spray of water and just knock them off. They're not very mobile. They don't, some of them fly in an early stage, but most of them that you see can't fly. They don't walk very well. If you knock them off the plant, they're unlikely to make it back onto the plant. They're going to get eaten by something. You may have noticed ants with your aphids. The ants protect the aphids because they're eating the excrement of the aphid. We call it honeydew. Nice way of saying aphid poop. But it's a sugary substance that the ants find nutritious, and so they farm that and protect the aphids against predators. If you knock them off of the plant, they're not protected by the ants anymore, and other bugs are going to find them and eat them. Similarly, you can just wipe them off with your fingers. You'll get a little stain on your fingers that washes off. But just disturb their little colony. What they are is a bunch of breeding aphids. They are born pregnant. They don't need, they are doing a kind of reproduction that doesn't need sex. And they just crank out live birth aphids in their little colony over and over and over again. And you have to disrupt that colony and make them more susceptible to being eaten by the natural predators that are in your garden. If you get more serious problems like fungal problems that you don't seem to be able to manage, there is a good all-purpose kind of broad spectrum fungus that is organic gardening listed. This is Monterey. Oh no, this is the insect spray. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, this is BT. No. Anyway, there's one called Monterey Complete Disease Control, which is a bacteria that acts as a fungicide, and it basically takes up all the ecological niches that the fungus wants to use, and is a very effective fungicide that you can use for really bad cases of mildew. And you can even try it for some of the fungal diseases that attack tomatoes, the wilts, and blights, which are a problem with them. I did want to talk a little bit about BT. BT is listed for organic gardening as well. This is Bacillus thuringiensis, which is only affects caterpillars, and it kills them. It paralyzes their digestion. It's another bacteria. I'm of two minds about it. The problem that I see with it is that it kills all caterpillars that ingest it. And I don't want to spread it around if I'm having a problem from one little kind of caterpillar on one plant. I don't want to spread Bacillus thuringiensis around to kill the monarch butterfly caterpillars and the pipevine swallowtail caterpillars that I'm trying to attract to my garden. And so I have decided not to use Bacillus thuringiensis in my garden, and to stick with things that have no real residual effect. If I feel the absolute need to spray something, I have used oil and I have used soap, and I'm fairly comfortable with those because I can aim it where it should go, and I know that it's not going to bother anything else. Okay, so pest control really is a matter of lots of different plants planted, some companion planting with flowers and things that smell strongly, and then keeping a close eye on your garden and picking things off. For instance, every year, people with roses have trouble with the rose weevil, which is a little red and black weevil that looks like a ladybug with a long snout. And they make holes in the buds and make the flowers come out with holes in them. And it's disappointing for people. But once you learn that there's only one generation of that insect per year, and that it's fairly effective to just take a bowl of water with a drop of detergent in it to break the surface tension and to flick them into the bowl as you see them and drown them, you can reduce their numbers significantly. And once they've come through your garden and gone, they're gone for the year. And the next crop of rose flowers won't have holes in them. So again, we don't need to take the elephant gun to take care of the mouse. We don't need the broad spectrum insecticide that will lurk there and wait for the weevil to walk on it to kill it. It's too late then anyway. They've already done the damage. We can do it by other means, and organic gardening is not limited to vegetable gardening. Organic gardening can and in my view, should be applied to your entire garden. If you have a lawn, you have a choice. You don't have to use highly concentrated chemical fertilizers that will largely run off into the gutters and streams. You can use an organic lawn fertilizer. If you look for it, it says organic. One of the ways you can tell a fertilizer is organic, if it's balanced and have all three elements in it, there's really no way you can get more than about 7% nitrogen in it. Even concentrated bat guano or blood meal only has about 12% nitrogen in it. And so when you dilute that with phosphorus and potash elements so that you have some balance to the fertilizer, that 12% has to be reduced considerably. So a fertilizer like this chicken manure, which is just chicken manure, is 3% nitrogen and 2% phosphorus, 3% potash, 3-3. The only way you can get really big numbers is by using chemical fertilizers. This is a balanced multi-purpose 16, 16, 16. So just looking at that, you know that it's not an organic fertilizer, and of course it's not marked organic. You can read a fertilizer package just like you do a label at the grocery store and find out where the fertilizer elements come from. So in a chemical fertilizer, it's from monoammonium phosphate, and in an organic fertilizer, your nitrogen is coming from blood meal, feather meal, chicken manure, bat guano, alfalfa meal. Those are the sources of the nitrogen in an organic fertilizer.
And the nitrogen's the first number.
And right, nitrogen is always the first number. So in this fertilizer, it's 4% nitrogen. Second number is phosphorus, 5%. And then potash, which is potassium, 3%. And those are what we call the macronutrients. They're the big three that every plant needs to grow, some in different proportions. And then micronutrients would be things like iron and zinc, manganese, which the plants only need in relatively small amounts, and some of which are listed on some of the fertilizers as well. Let's see.
Hey there, Dan. I'm gonna start thinking a little bit.
I think we're ready for some questions, Taylor.
Yeah, no worries. Well, actually, you did such a great job. You actually went through and answered a lot of the questions that came up, and many that I had as well. So I appreciate your thoroughness. And really, I kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about some things that I was thinking about, and then give you a last couple of minutes to just finish up the final thoughts before we close out today. But I just really also appreciate how you went through and made it easy for the guests or whoever comes in to kind of tell what is organic, what isn't organic, giving an idea about the OMRI certification, looking at the labels, looking at the fertilizer labels. What's really nice about us at Slow Gardens is we do bring in mainly organic stuff, and anything that is organic is clearly labeled. So it's pretty easy to know when you come into the store what you're getting and if you are getting what you want. And then really the kind of questions you tended to go through and answer them for the main part. And just knowing, is there any plants that maybe just some shout out ones that you can let anyone who is coming into the store, maybe wants to do some organic gardening, maybe wants to do some vegetable gardening, but doesn't know what the first thing to choose? I think you mentioned a couple of them, but what will be like your top pick to really look at and going into the store right now?
Okay, well, what's coming into the stores now is appropriate for fall planting, would be the easiest things to grow would be lettuces, kale, Swiss chard, choy. There are many kinds of choy, from tall ones to short ones, from green ones to red ones. Spinach. It's this time for spinach. And then all of the, if you want to get a little more into it, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. But the lettuces are quick and very easy and satisfying to grow. You can get little gem lettuce starts, and I was just looking at the Good Earth, and you can they were having a sale earlier in the season on little gems for like $6 a pound. Now they're back up to the regular price, which is closer to $12 a pound. Grow your own little gem lettuce. It'll taste better, and it's very satisfying to do that. You can also, for the fall, carrots, radishes, all of the root crops, beets, are good to grow. And there is a trick. Some of the stores will have starts of those kind of root crops, and the problem with them is there's a whole bunch of plants in the little, this is a broccoli, and there's only one broccoli in the cell, so that's easy to plant. But if there were 12 carrots in there, then it's harder to plant. And so what you do is just take them all out and soak them to the point where you can separate them out, and then you give them a little space so they can grow into big carrots. But also herbs, for the winter, you're going to grow parsley, cilantro, sage, oregano, thyme. You're not going to grow basil. It's going to be too cold pretty soon. But chives, dill, lots of things to grow. So come in, talk to us a little bit. Hopefully we won't have too many things on the tables that aren't appropriate for the season. I will tell you, I still have some peppers out there because I grow peppers into the winter. But the powers that be will make me take him off the tables pretty soon, because for most people they're appropriate. And don't forget about the things that you're putting in now for next season, which are the artichokes, some of the berries, and strawberries in particular. Get those in the ground now.
Yeah, definitely having a nice balance of the more perennial plants that you can plant now and actually have it for a couple of years versus the more annual plants that you do for seasonal, and understanding the cooler weather season crops, the ones that you mentioned in the very beginning, all the brassicas and lettuces and chards are definitely good ones to go to right now, which is very helpful.
Let me give a shout out for our, this is a printout of the Sloat, what does it say, vegetable planting calendar. Don't take this as absolute truth for your particular microclimate, but it does give you an idea of what's appropriate to plant in a given month. And Pam Pierce's book that I mentioned earlier, Golden Gate Gardening, has even more elaborate planting charts and more information for the warmer climates over in Contra Costa or the South Bay that are a little bit different. So,
And that's on our website.
This is on the Sloat website under Learn, and then How to Garden or something like that. And go to the edible gardening section, and you'll find the chart.
Definitely lots of really good information on there that you can actually just kind of easily look through, and we try to make it very understandable to anyone in their skill of gardening at any level. And it's just really great. And I wanted to thank you again for going over such a detailed and nice swath of information of all these different kinds of stuff we can do with organic gardening, both for veggies, for perennials, for ornamentals, all that kinds of stuff. Even though we're more focusing on veggies for this class.